The long-awaited Electro Archon, the Raiden Shogun, has finally become a playable character in Genshin Impact. Hello Kings, Queens, and Majesties, welcome to Whalestat, I am Slice of Otaku, and the Raiden Shogun has quickly become a favorite character of mine that I immediately got up to level 90. So of course a proper guide after having played around with her kit for some time is in order. However, in this particular case, I do feel the need to preface our guide here by saying that this is a character that has clearly been balanced around her constellations, specifically her second one, which we'll get into more specifics on later in the video. But the reason I bring this up is that the gameplay you will be seeing in this video, and presumably several others, will not be a proper showcase of her base capabilities at C0. And so the Shogun is unfortunately not so well suited to be a free-to-play unit. Now we have an entire video dedicated to the subject, but I do want to make it clear that not once in that video did I complain about her damage numbers in the slightest. The Raiden Shogun is intended to be a sub-DPS character, and so the presumed notion of wanting her to be the next Ganyu or whatever is completely baseless. Especially when considering prior discussions we've had on the channel, that's just not what I want from these characters. Yet even still, to play devil's advocate, the Raiden Shogun does take up a whole lot of field time, and so I can see why she would end up being compared to the likes of main DPS units. But I digress. The Raiden Shogun is a 5-star Electro Polearm user. As per usual, we will be breaking down and discussing her talents, skills, optimal artifacts, weapons, and constellations, all of which you may find timestamps for on the video and in the description below. First and foremost, we have her talents. The Raiden Shogun normal, charged, and plunge attacks are all very standard, and if you play her correctly, you will almost never see them, and so it is for this reason that unless you are maxed out on all her other talents, there is no reason to upgrade this one at all. And even then, only do it if you just love her that much. Now, her elemental skill is an interesting one. It operates in a similar fashion to that of Fischl's as a source of off-field damage, albeit you do need to actively strike an enemy for it to proc once every 0.9 seconds per party. Which is to say that in co-op, another player can get it to proc, dealing 20% of its usual damage. Furthermore, while it is out, characters have their burst damage increased based on the energy cost of said burst. And so with that, characters that possess high costing elemental bursts will see the greatest benefit from this. For example, if coupled with the talent at level 6, a burst with an energy cost of 80 would benefit from a 21.6 damage increase, which is wonderful. And what's really interesting is that this thing sticks around for a whole 25 seconds and has a cooldown of 10 seconds, meaning there is no reason it should not always be up. The Raiden Shogun's elemental burst, however, is even more noteworthy, as it is precisely the reason we will refrain from leveling our normal attack talent. By unsheathing her blade from her chest, the Shogun is able to make use of her famed Muso no Hitotachi, dealing electro damage in an AoE, followed by a stance change not unlike that of Tartaglia's elemental skill, where she wields her sword for 7 seconds. Now, the damage of this form is largely dependent on the number of resolve stacks you are able to accumulate prior to use. And at base, you will be able to generate resolve stacks by using the elemental bursts of other characters to a maximum of 60 resolve. And the amount you accumulate for each will be dependent on the energy cost of their bursts. So higher costing bursts will serve to generate more resolve for Raiden's burst. But yeah, once she has taken this stance, Raiden's normal, charged, and plunging attacks are infused with electro damage, which cannot be overridden and are considered to be elemental burst damage. Hence our stance on the first talent. Now, when Raiden hits an enemy in this state, she will generate energy for all nearby party members once every second for a maximum of 5 times throughout this 7-second duration. In terms of upgrade priority, her elemental burst is paramount. You will want this as high up as possible, followed by her elemental skill, and finally her normal attack if you are so inclined. As for her passive talents, Wishes Unnumbered makes it easier to accumulate resolve for Raiden's burst, as when nearby party members gain elemental orbs or particles, Raiden gains 2 resolve stacks, which may occur once every 3 seconds. So not nearly as effective as doing so by way of elemental bursts, but the addition is a welcome one indeed. Following this, we have Enlightened One. For every 1% above 100% of Raiden's energy recharge stat, she is granted a 0.4% increase to her elemental damage bonus and a 0.6% greater energy provided to the party by way of her elemental burst attacks. So for instance, if we were to get her energy recharge up to 300%, we would be looking at an 80% electro damage bonus, what is damn near like having 2 electro goblets. So suffice to say, energy recharge will be very important for this character. Then finally, we have All Preserver. Mora used when ascending swords and polearms is decreased by 50%. We don't really have anything else like this in the game, and it is really useful, so much so that I feel like it more than makes up for her inability to cook. Now moving on to her constellations, this is where the Raiden Shogun really becomes a sight to behold, for better or for worse. At Constellation 1, the elemental burst of teammates will generate resolve at an increased rate. When electro characters use their elemental bursts, the resolve gained is increased by 80%. And when characters belong to other elemental types do so, the resolve gained is increased by 20%. This is majorly a quality of life addition that better serves to ensure a more consistent threshold of power for Raiden and further incentivizes the use of other electro characters alongside her. Now Constellation 2 is where the monster emerges. The Raiden Shogun's elemental burst attacks will ignore 60% of an opponent's defense. To quantify this, C2 as compared to C0 or even C1 stands to see what is approximately a 40% damage increase across the board. That is absolutely asinine. Whereas otherwise her field time and associated preparation at previous points may be considered a waste, with such time better serving a proper main DPS, she can now validate her presence. At C2, she feels like a completely different character. At C4, when her elemental burst state concludes, all nearby party members excluding the Raiden Shogun herself benefit from a 30% bonus to attack for 10 seconds. This is a really good benefit to have, but truthfully, not many things will be able to live long enough for you to really see the benefit of this, but perhaps it will be more useful at a later point in the game's lifespan. And I suppose the very same may be said for his C6 as well. Once every second, Raiden's attacks while in her burst state will reduce the elemental burst cooldowns of all party members besides herself by 1 second, and this may trigger up to a total of 5 times. This just makes the rotation that much quicker. For now, I've decided to stop at Constellation 3, but depending on how useful this constellation looks to be in the distant future, I might just summon on her rerun. I don't know. If you're going to go for constellations with this character, C2 is quite clearly the sweet spot. Again, for better or for worse. Moving on to her weapons, by far the best choice to be had would be that of the 5-star Engulfing Lightning. That 55% energy recharge substat at level 90 is way too good. It also provides an attack increase of 28% of her energy recharge over 100% for a max bonus of 80% attack. Not to mention, you also gain 30% energy recharge for 12 seconds after using an elemental burst. And because Raiden's burst is not a one and done, that 30% addition is present all throughout her stance change. This weapon is disgustingly good with her. However, there is a new 4-star weapon more than worth considering. The Catch is a polearm that you can get to Refinement 5 by just playing the game. And so with that, I will be discussing it under the impression that you have actually gotten it up to Refinement 5. And energy recharge substat is again delicious. But oh my goodness, that increase to elemental burst damage by 32% and burst crit rate by 12% is fantastic. If you are not running around with 5-star weapons galore, use this weapon and you will have a great time regardless. Now, if you are already incredibly built up on energy recharge, and I mean at least over 200% by way of your artifacts, and don't have Engulfing Lightning at your disposal, Staff of Homa can put in work by bringing your crit damage up like crazy. If your desires reside on the other end of the spectrum, however, the Primordial Jade Spear is there to satisfy your crit rate needs. At the very least, there is no reason not to have a good weapon on Raiden, which is wonderful. But with her weapons out of the way, let's move on to her artifacts. Now, there is no debate to be had here. 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate was pretty much made for Raiden. With 2-piece, we're looking at a 20% bonus to energy recharge, which we love, and a 4-piece burst damage is increased by 25% of energy recharge to a maximum of 75% bonus. I mean, that is just insane. That is a lot of extra damage to be had. It also provides us a reason not to exceed 300% energy recharge. Now, I do understand the predicament many of us may actually be in. This artifact set is a new one, so perhaps you may not have the best options available to you just yet. And so technically there are some alternatives, but really and truly, if you want to make the most out of the character, you should be working towards the Emblem of Severed Fate set. But even still, you can run 4-piece Thunder Soother, or 2-piece Gladiators, 2-piece Shimenawa's Reminiscence for the benefits to attack, or swap out one of those two for 2-piece Noblesse Oblige. And if your Raiden absolutely is not ready for prime time, but you still want to use her regardless, you can turn her into more of a support unit by way of the 4-piece Tenacity of the Millilith set, making her a buffer for your other units. And surprisingly, this is actually pretty effective, as again, with her E lasting 25 seconds with a 10-second cooldown, we are looking at a constant 20% attack buff to all of your units, what I'm sure will be able to lead to some crazy shenanigans in the future. But getting back to the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate set, as for your sands, you are going to want either attack percentage or energy recharge. The choice between the two will ultimately come down to what your team needs, but for me, I had far better luck with attack percentage stats than I did with energy recharge. But because I had some great energy recharge substats, I did not suffer much at all. For our goblet, we have a choice between electro damage bonus and attack percentage. Now, you'll more than likely find superior yields with electro damage bonus, but in the event that you have more than enough energy recharge and are actually using an energy recharge sands, attack may provide more value to you. However, the same may be said in the event that you are using an attack sands along with the catch. But definitely come to these decisions with the substats of your own artifacts in mind. Crit rate and crit damage are most valuable, followed by attack percentage or energy recharge, depending on your team's needs. But that just about does it for the artifacts. Let us move on to the team compositions. As for teams, for the sake of optimal rotations, we will want to be very considerate when it comes to the energy recharge rates of our teammates. And before we go any further here, I have to express that unfortunately, Beidou is not a good teammate for the Raiden Shogun, at least not in regards to benefiting her directly. Beidou's burst does not proc alongside the Raiden Shogun's because those attacks of hers are considered to be burst attacks, not normal attacks. However, even still, for whatever reason, Xingqiu's burst is not limited in the same fashion despite the same described limitations. One of my favorite Raiden teams right now includes Eula, as the two work incredibly well together. Eula's bursts are heavy, and so she benefits from Raiden's burst buff a whole lot and also provides a good amount of resolve. From there, Superconduct makes Eula's already nuclear physical damage world-ending, and in the meanwhile, when she is building back up, Raiden can fill the void. That is, if anything is still left alive. To buff Eula even further, we have Rosaria to add to our crit rate, and since Eula has her own tag-along, I end up doing the very same for Raiden Shogun in the form of Kujo Sada. And if you have Kujo Sada at Constellation 6 by any chance, that is not only an attack buff, but also a 60% crit damage buff to Raiden as an Electro character. And because her energy cost is so steep, that is amazing resolve for Raiden, especially at C1. But you can substitute Sara for the likes of Bennett for the sake of having a healer and more general and easily achieved buffs. Or if you're afraid of getting hit, call on the Geo Archon Zhongli. If you want to mess around with off-field damage, throw in Fischl instead for fun. Ideally, you want to get Eula up to around 130% energy recharge, and Rosaria a bit below that at 120%. As for Sada, energy recharge is great for her as well, so honestly with just the 2-piece benefit of the Severed Fate set alone, you are at a good starting point. Now, another one of her best teams is also pretty free-to-play friendly, yet contains some of the best characters in the game: Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Bennett. Now, this all-star cast looks great with a whole lot of characters as is. However, the truly remarkable thing about this is that Raiden's providence of energy to her teammates makes it so that we can afford to have less energy recharge on other characters than we would normally. And so with that, we can place different weapons on them. And the same goes for artifacts. So yeah, for the first time in probably forever, my Xingqiu has used a weapon besides the sacrificial sword. And with that, you can definitely see some big damage differences. Now you're gonna want about 130% energy recharge on Xiangling and a bit more than that on Xingqiu. Somewhere between 135% and 150%. Highly recommend, this one is really fun. Now, enemies being scattered during your very limited 7 seconds with Raiden's burst stance can be annoying, so an Anemo character can go a long way when it comes to mitigating that by way of crowd control. However, in her sword stance, Raiden does actually have a good bit of reach with her attacks, so things like superconduct shouldn't be all too troublesome. Mostly just depends on the placement of the enemy. But yeah guys, that just about does it for our Raiden Shogun guide. I really hope it was able to provide you some degree of value. If you have the Raiden Shogun, let us know how she is for you down below, and while you're at it, be sure to subscribe to Whalestat with notifications on, as there is plenty more where that came from. I have been your host, Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching, and have an awesome day. I love you.